Robert Duvall noticed a man on a park bench who had been invisible to everyone else in the town for 3 weeks. Not because the man was hiding, because the people driving past had stopped seeing what was always there. Duvall stopped. He sat down. And what that man told him in the next hour sent Duvall back to the same bench the following morning, this time not alone. It was October 2010, and the bench was on the small green at the center of Washington, Virginia, not a park exactly, more a triangle of grass where two roads met, and someone had put a bench in a tree decades ago, and the town had grown around them both. The bench faced east, which meant the morning light came at it directly and made it, in October, a warmer spot than the temperature warranted. This was probably why the man was always there. Duvall had been driving past the green every morning for 3 weeks on his way to and from the various errands that structured his mornings: the post office, the hardware store, the feed supply, the ordinary infrastructure of a rural life that requires a different kind of attention than a professional life does. He noticed the man the way he noticed most things, initially without intention, registering him as a piece of the morning landscape, the way you register a particular fence post or a tree that is always there when you pass a certain stretch of road. Then, on the fourth or fifth morning, with slightly more attention. And then, by the second week, with the specific quality of focused peripheral noticing that he had learned, over a long life, to take seriously when it arrived without invitation on his way to and from various errands: the post office, the hardware store, the pharmacy, the ordinary infrastructure of a rural life. He noticed the man the way he noticed most things, initially without intention, registering him as a piece of the landscape the way you register a particular tree or a fence post that is always there when you pass. Then, on the fourth or fifth morning, with slightly more attention. And then, by the second week, with the quality of focused peripheral noticing that he had learned, over a long life, to take seriously when it arrived. The man was always there at 8:15, which was a specific enough time that the precision of it registered. Not 8 o'clock, not 8:30, but 8:15. And consistently so, in a way that suggested the time had meaning beyond convenience. A person who sits on a bench at the same time every morning for 3 weeks is not there by accident. They are there because the time matters, or because what happened at that time matters, or because the time is connected to something that the bench is connected to. Duvall had spent 50 years watching people, and he understood by the second week that the 8:15 was not incidental, always alone. Always on the same end of the bench, the left end facing east, hands in the pockets of a jacket that was warm enough for the season but not quite warm enough for sitting still in October morning air. He was in his mid-70s, white-haired, lean in the way of someone who has always been lean, rather than someone who has become lean recently. He watched the road in the specific direction of the post office, which was 3 blocks east. He was not reading. He was not on a phone. He was watching the road. On a Wednesday morning in the third week, Duvall stopped the truck. He had not planned to stop that morning specifically. He had been planning, in a vague way, to stop at some point. The accumulation of 22 mornings had produced a weight that was looking for a place to land. But the specific Wednesday had not announced itself as the morning when the weight would land. It was simply the morning when it did, which is how most decisions of this kind happen, not when you intend them, but when the conditions are finally sufficient and the moment presents itself and you either act on it or drive past and wonder later why you didn't. There was no particular reason this Wednesday was different from the Wednesdays before it, except that the accumulation of 22 mornings of the same man on the same bench watching the same stretch of road had produced, by Wednesday morning, a weight that was sufficient to make stopping feel like the appropriate response rather than an interruption of his schedule. He parked on the road beside the green. He got out. He walked to the bench. The man looked up when he heard footsteps on the grass. "Mind if I sit?" Duvall said. The man looked at the bench, its length, its occupancy, and then at Duvall with the expression of someone who has been sitting on a public bench alone for 3 weeks and is not expected to be asked. "Go ahead," he said. Duvall sat down on the right end of the bench. The morning was cold, the light coming at a low angle through the October trees, the green quiet except for the occasional car moving through the intersection. They sat without talking for a few minutes, which suited both of them. "You're here every morning," Duvall said. It was not an accusation or a question exactly, more an acknowledgement of something observed. The man looked at him. He was deciding something, how much of this to engage with, whether the stranger beside him was the kind of stranger whose curiosity was worth answering. "Yes," he said. "Waiting for someone?" A pause. "My wife used to walk past here every morning," the man said, "on her way to the post office, 8:15 every day for 30 years. He was looking at the road east. "She passed away in September. This is just—" He stopped. Not because he didn't know the end of the sentence, but because the end of the sentence was something he had not said out loud before and was discovering, in this moment, that saying it out loud was different from thinking it. "This is where I can still expect to see her," he said. "Almost." Duvall was quiet for a moment. The man's name was Gerald Marsh. He had been born in Rappahannock County in 1936, had married his wife Eleanor in 1961, and had spent the following 49 years in a life that had been, by his own assessment, ordinary in the best sense of the word, full of the daily accumulations that ordinary lives are made of and that only become visible as extraordinary when they stop. Eleanor had walked to the post office every morning because she enjoyed the walk and because she wrote letters, actual letters, to a network of friends and family that she had maintained with the consistency of someone who understood that relationships are not maintained by feeling, but by the daily decision to act as if they matter. She had not walked past the green on the morning of September 14th. She had not walked past on any morning since. Gerald had driven to the post office himself, on the days when there was mail to send, in the manner of someone completing a task that needs completing, and not allowing himself to think too much about the difference between driving to the post office and walking to it. The letters Eleanor had been writing, to a sister in Maryland, to a friend from college who still lived in Charlottesville, to a former neighbor who had moved to Tennessee, had stopped being written. Gerald had considered continuing them and had not known how to begin. Gerald had found, in the weeks after, that the absence of Eleanor's specific daily rhythm was the hardest part, harder than the silence in the house, harder than the empty chair at dinner, harder than any of the large things that grief produces. It was the small things, the timed things, the 8:15 on the green things that the body missed in a way the mind could not manage. He had started coming to the bench because he did not know what else to do with 8:15 on a morning when the house was quiet, and the chair by the window was empty, and the absence of a particular footstep on the front path had a specific physical weight that he had not been prepared for and that no one had warned him about. He had not told his daughter he was doing it. He had not told anyone. He simply put on his jacket in the morning and walked to the bench and sat on the left end and watched the road east. And the watching was not the same as Eleanor walking past, but it was adjacent to it in a way that made the morning possible when it would otherwise not have been when Eleanor had walked past with her envelopes. Duvall sat with this for a while. They talked, not about grief directly, but around it, in the way of two people who understand that the subject is present without needing to announce it. Gerald talked about Eleanor's letters and the people she had written to for 40 years, some of whom he had never met but whose names he knew the way you know the names of people who matter to someone you love. He talked about the post office, which had changed its hours twice in the last decade, and about the counter clerk who had known Eleanor by name and who had been the first person outside the family to bring food to the house after she died. Duvall listened. At 9:10, Gerald said he should probably get back. He said it the way people say it when they don't have anywhere particular to be, but have spent enough time in one place and need the dignity of a reason to move. Duvall stood. They shook hands. Gerald walked in the direction of the road that led back toward his house. Duvall sat back down on the bench for a few minutes after Gerald left. Then, he drove home. The following morning, Thursday, Duvall was on the bench at 8:10. He had thought about whether to come back for approximately the length of the drive home from the green, which was 4 minutes, and had arrived at the conclusion that the thought was unnecessary, because the decision had already been made by the time he stood up from the bench the previous day. He was not someone who spent time deliberating on decisions that were already made. He had brought 2 coffees in a small thermos, his own mug and a second cup. Gerald arrived at 8:15 and found Duvall already there, on the right end of the bench, with the coffee on the slats between them. Gerald looked at the coffee. "I'd take it with a little milk," he said. "I didn't bring milk," Duvall said. Gerald sat down. He took the coffee. He drank it without milk, which he had done many times in his life when circumstances required it. They watched the road east together. A car went past, then a truck. Then, at 8:22, a woman in a blue coat walking with purpose toward the post office, envelopes visible in her hand. Neither of them said anything. Duvall came back to the bench for the rest of October. Not every morning, but most of them. The pattern settling into something that did not require discussion or agreement because it was self-evidently the right thing, and both of them knew it without needing to say so. He did not tell Gerald who he was. Gerald did not ask. The bench did not require names, it required presence, which both of them provided, and the coffee on the days Duvall brought it, and the silence on the days that suited silence, and the conversation on the days that suited conversation, and neither of them was keeping score of which days were which, not every morning, but most of them. Sometimes he brought coffee, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes they talked for the full hour, and sometimes they sat mostly in silence, and both of those things were appropriate, and neither of them required the other to be different. Gerald Marsh still comes to the bench when the weather permits and his legs permit, and the morning is the kind of morning that makes sitting on a bench facing east seem like the appropriate use of 8:15. Not every day, but enough days that the bench and the green and the road east toward the post office remain part of how he understands the shape of a morning. Gerald Marsh still comes to the bench. He is 88 years old now. He has outlived Eleanor by 14 years, which is 14 years longer than he expected, and which he has spent, for the most part, in the same way he spent the years before, going about the business of the day, attending to what the day requires, finding the small accumulations of ordinary life sufficient in the way that people find them sufficient when they have been paying attention long enough to understand what they are worth. He comes less often than he used to. The October mornings are harder on the body at 88 than they were at 74. But he comes. His daughter drives him on the days the walk is too far. He has told the story of the man who sat down beside him on a Wednesday morning to his daughter and to one or two other people over the years. He did not know for the first several months who the man was. He had not asked, and Duvall had not offered, and both of them had found, by some unspoken agreement, that names were not necessary information for the bench to work. His daughter found out eventually. She recognized the description. She told Gerald. Gerald thought about it for a moment, in the unhurried way he thought about most things. "He takes his coffee without milk, too," he said. "I always wondered." He looked at the window. "I thought it was considerate, not bringing milk when he didn't know how I took it. Turned out it was just how he took it." He was quiet for a moment. "Same thing in the end. I always wondered." If this story reminded you that sometimes the most important thing is to sit down next to someone who has been sitting alone for 3 weeks and stay, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification bell. More stories about who Robert Duvall really was in the mornings and the silences are coming every single week.